Is the Daf Yomi for Shabbos Kodesh, and we're recording it on Friday. It should be a Shemira for all of Am Yisrael. In this Eis Tzara, the hostages should be released speedily from captivity, and there should be a Shemira on all the Chayalim. So 4 lines from the bottom on 85b, Bai Rabba, Sheves HaPochta B'damim Mahu. Let's say you have lost wages. Let's say you have the lost wages, and accompanying the fact that you have the lost wages, you also have a depreciation of the person's value. Rashi explains, he received a wound, a blow, that he needs to stop working. But in the end, he's going to be complete. He's going to get back to his full status. So he just has lost wages. But right now, he's worth less money. So if he becomes sold right now, he'd get less money. But if he waits a few weeks, he'll be back to the same value. So that's the question. Shevas haporto b'dam mao. Now Gemara asks the question, hey Chidam, what's the scenario? Hold on 1 second. So the Gemara says, what's the scenario that we're talking about here? Are you going to be responsible for the temporary depreciation in value? Me Amrina, do we say? So the Gemara says, Mao, hey Chidam, what's the scenario? Could go and sheikiu al yado. Let's say you struck him on his hand, v'tzimtu yado, and his hand basically became temporary, unable to be used. The sofa achsor. But in the end, it'll get back to its old status. Do we say, Mai, keeping the sofa achsor, well, you have label midi? Can we say that since in the end, it'll go back to its initial status, he's therefore doesn't have to give him any damages. Odoma hashta mia ifchase. Or do we say, well, right now he's got less, he's worth less, so maybe he has to pay for the temporary loss. And Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof. Tashma hamaka avav chabura. Let's say you strike Rahman on your parents, and you don't make a wound on them. Or if you strike a wounded person on Yom Kippur, where you usually have a monetary penalty, for striking your parent, Rahman al it's death, but you didn't make a wound. Or if you strike a friend on Yom Kippur, under these circumstances, Chayav B'Kuon, on top of 86A, you have to pay the 5 Nezek Tzari Poy Sheves Poshes. The Gemara says, what does it mean? What does it mean that you could do damage on somebody, so you have to pay Nezek Tzari Poy Sheves and Poshes, without making a wound? Aren't we talking about a case? Aren't we talking about a case where you struck him on his hand? And in the end, it's going to grow back. So even though it's just a temporary damage, you're still responsible to pay for it. So doesn't this answer the question? The Gemara says no. No, we're talking about a case where you made him deaf, and so you didn't make a wound. Gemara says that can't be. But didn't we say that Rabbah taught that if you make your father deaf, you're going to be killed because it's impossible that you make him deaf without a wound that gives off a little bit of blood. Now, so here, what must we be talking about? It's not where you made a wound, a wound. It's not where you hit him without making a wound, but rather, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a case where that you shaved him off, so therefore you shaved his hair, so therefore you diminished his value without making a wound. Gemara says, no, gilcho mahadar. If you cut off his hair, it's going to grow back. That's exactly our question, whether or not it's okay. That's exactly our question. So Gemara says, no. Hakama eskinan ingon shesachu nasha telo hadar, that you put cream on him, and so the hair would never go back. So you did damage to him without making the wound. Tsar, so there's pain. Disli kartufe bereshe, because he has cracks in the head. Vitzavachi, and so it causes him pain. Mehanu kartufe, from these cracks. Ripoy, what's the medical expenses? To buy asuya, he needs to pay for a cream to heal the pain. Sheves tave mirakid be kubi, to buy michve gune aresha. Kartufani. Sheves means to say his job was to be a dancer, make jokes at a wedding, and he needs to show like the movements in his head, like clowns do. That until now, until he's healed, he can't use anything with his cracks in his head. And even though he can do other things, he has to give him the lost wages for being a clown. Boches, humiliation. There's no greater humiliation than losing your hair. So therefore, we have this case where you can have to pay the 5 damages without causing a wound. And so it's not necessarily an answer to the question of a temporary loss in value as a result of the wound. So we haven't answered that question. So the Gemara says, Umilsa, the Rabba Pshita Abaye, and something that was clear to Rabba is very obvious to Abaye. It was very obvious to Abaye in one direction. It was obvious to Rabba in the other direction. We learned, let's say you struck him on his hand, Vitsimta, and it shriveled up, and in the end it will grow back. Abaye Amar Nosing Sheves Gedola, Sheves Katana. Abaye says you give him Sheves Gedola, which is the value of the hand, and Sheves Katana, which is all the days that he can't work. You look at him as though he's like a guard of squash. So Abaye says you pay for the damage that was done. The Rabba says, you don't pay for the damage to the hand because you just pay for him until it goes back to its status. Each day is loss of that work. So Rabba says you don't give him the value of his hand because it's going to grow back. In Mar, we learned Takotea Yad Evid Ivri Shachavero. So we learned, let's try and see who's right. So the Gemara is going to try and bring a proof. Actually, no, what the Gemara is going to do now is to bring another dispute between Abaye and Rava on a similar topic and see if it connects. Somebody who chops off the hand of a Hebrew slave of his friend. Abaye says, no single Sheves Gedola Eved, Sheves Katana. Rav, you give the damage to the hand to the Hebrew slave, and the loss of work to the master. And Rava says, Akol yino single Eved. V'yolakach ben karka. So Rava says you give everything to the. So Rava says, so this hand is never growing back. By the way, this is you actually chop it off. You actually chop it off. So Abaye says you give the value of the loss of the hand to the slave and the value of the lost work to the master. Whereas Rava says everything is given to the slave. You lakach ben karka and you purchase real estate with that. Rav ochel peros and the master eats the fruits, the value that he's lost. That way the slave gets to keep it, but he just loses the fruits for the lost wages while he was working. Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious that Piches Eitzel Atzmo. So the Gemara explains that this ruling, it would be obvious that if it would be Piches Eitzel Atzmo, Eitzel Rabba or Piches. So where are they arguing about? They're arguing in a situation where the wound diminished the slaves. We're in the situation where the wound diminished the value of the slave, but did not diminish the master's value. He was able to do work. And Echidami, what's that scenario? The Paske or Reish Une or Reish Nechire, where basically cut his ear or he cut his nose, so basically he could still do his work. Everybody would say under those circumstances, Everybody would say that the slave gets everything. And so Abai and Rav are only arguing in a situation where he chopped off his hand. So it's not only a loss for the slave, it's also a loss for the master. And now we say something which really is going to be discussed in much greater depth on Amabez. The Gemara likes to talk about something just before the Mishnah. So it says, Boshes, if he embarrasses him, everything is calculated according to the one who does the embarrassing and the one who is embarrassed. So the Gemara asks, Mani Masnisin, who is our Mishnah like? Or Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Huda? Our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir, and it's not like Rabbi Huda. El Rabbi Shimon. Our Mishnah is like Rabbi Shimon. The Tanan, Vikuan Rono San Ki'ilu Heim B'nei Chorin Sheyardu Minechseim. And it says that all these people, whether they're wealthy or whether they're rich, if they're embarrassed, even the rich people, we look at them as though they were ki'ilu, like as though they were free people who lost their money. Rashi says we don't look at the poor person according to his poverty to be lenient, and not the wealthy person according to his wealth, but rather we look at them all in the same manner. So what does this mean? That's the position Shehem b'nei Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. That's the position of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says Hagadol afi godlo, v'akato afi kotno. Rabbi Yehuda says that if a person was great, we look at him. If he was great, we look at him as in a way according to his stature. So therefore, he has to pay more for the embarrassment. So there's more for the embarrassment. And the katan, we look at the person who's of diminished stature according to his diminishment. No. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says, Ashirim ro'ano soki iluhem b'nei chorin sheyardu b'nechseim. Rabbi Shimon says, the wealthy people were embarrassed. We view them as though they were free people. Sheyardu b'nechseim. Rabbi Shimon says, there's two distinctions. If a wealthy person was embarrassed, we look at him, though he was a free person who lost its value. Whereas the poor people were embarrassed, we look at them as though they were poor people, as the diminished people, and so therefore their humiliation would be less from a regular poor person. So the Gemara says, now money. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah? If you want to say it's Rabbi Meir, if you want to say our Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir, it can't be. Everything goes according to the one who's embarrassed and the one who did the embarrassing and the one who's embarrassed. And Rabbi Meir says everybody is viewed in the same way, meaning to say as though they were free people who lost their money. And Rabbi Yehuda Masnisin Katani, if you want to say it's Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah says our Mishnah says if you embarrass a blind person, you're responsible. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, Sume and Loboshes. Rabbi Yehuda says a blind person does not have humiliation. So it must be Rabbi Shimon here. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, and so it must be that it follows the position of Rabbi Shimon, who says that there's a distinction between the value of the humiliation of somebody who is wealthy, according to the valuation of the humiliation of a poor person. And that's what our Mishnah says when it says everything goes according to the humiliation of the one who's embarrassing and the one who's embarrassed. Gemara says you could even say it's Rabbi Yehuda, and you can't challenge Rabbi Yehuda from the fact that it says that a blind person is responsible. Kiyama Rabbi Yehuda, when Rabbi Yehuda says that a blind person has no humiliation, that's to take from him, to take from the blind person if he embarrassed other people. But to give it to him, that you have to do. Says it can't be, but from the fact that it says in the next clause of the Mishnah, the Yashin should be Yesh Potter. It says in the next clause of the Mishnah that one who embarrasses a sleeping person is responsible, and a sleeping person who embarrasses is exempt. The low katani suma should be Yesh Potter. And it doesn't say a blind person who embarrassed somebody is exempt. Mikal, the lo shanehachi, lo shanachi. We see that we don't draw this distinction by a blind person. Machavarta, the Masnisin Rabbi Shimon. So it's clear that our Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, Man Tano Hada Tanu Rabbanan. Who is the one who taught? Niskavin Labayesh Es Katan. This is a brisa. If somebody intends to embarrass a minor, Ubiyesh Es Gadol, and embarrassed an adult, no saying Lagadol May Boshto Shal Katan. Since your intent was to marry the minor, and give to the adult the value of what it would be to embarrass the minor, which is less than embarrassing the adult. So you intended to embarrass a slave and you embarrass the free person. No single ben chorin to make both you give to the free person the value of the slave. Who is the author of our Mishnah? Or Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Shimon. It's neither one. Gemara is assuming the assumption of the Gemara is katan ben achasim. The Gemara's assumption is not like I translated it. Now, when it says small, it means small one in value, small in stature. He's poor, and gadol is gadol ben achasim, and great is great in value, and he's wealthy. And Rabbi Meir Amar Kul Ba'adei Adadin. Rabbi Meir says everybody's viewed together. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Elav Adam Bochas. Rabbi Yehuda says slaves don't get humiliation. And the Rabbi Shimon Ha'amar Niskavon Vayishazeh B'Yeshazeh Pater. Rabbi Shimon says if you intend to embarrass one, embarrass the other, you're exempt. So therefore, it's neither one of them. So the Gemara says, "My taima." How do we know that's Rabbi Shimon's position? What's the source for Rabbi Shimon? Kikatoa. It's like killing. Ma katoa adam eskavin lay until just like killing. You're not responsible once you intended to kill that person, because it says v'arav lo v'kam alav. It says he laid an ambush for him and he rose above him. Until he intended to kill this person, and not if he intended to kill somebody else. Until you actually cause this damage. It says she stuck out her hand and she grabs a hold of his mevushav, his beitzim in the fight in Exodus. So in Devarim, excuse me. She has to have intent. Gemara says no. Well, Rabbi Yehuda. No, we could say that our brisa is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda when we say that slaves don't have humiliation to give it to them. But we can evaluate them that they have to pay. Or alternatively, I feel Rabbi Meir. It can even say it's our position is Rabbi Meir, and even though Rabbi Meir doesn't draw a distinction between the humiliation of the wealthy and the poor. That's not a contradiction. Misavers gadol ben achasim, katan ben achasim. Who says gadol means that he has a lot of money, and katan means he has no money? Well, gadol mamish, katan mamish. Gadol is an actual adult, and a katan is a minor. And that's what it's saying, that you give to the gadol the amount that you intended that you would have had to pay to the minor. Mar says the katan barboshasu. Does the minor actually capable of having humiliation? Mar says yes. In kedamar papa. Yes, Rav Papa says there is a minor who has humiliation, and that's when he reaches the age that other people remember his humiliation, and they remind him of it. He is indeed embarrassed as a result of this. So a minor is capable of humiliation if he's at the age. A certain age. And also our Bryce is talking about that there's that's what it's referring to. And even though he's a minor, nevertheless, he understands. And so therefore when other people mention his humiliation and they humiliate him, he's indeed embarrassed as a result of that. Says the Mishnah on 86b. Our Mishnah says the following. Our Mishnah says, one who embarrasses a naked person, a person without clothes. We'll see what it is exactly. One who embarrasses a blind person. If you embarrass a blind person or a sleeping person, all these cases you're responsible. Or if a sleeping person who did the embarrassment, potter, he's exempt. Let's say a person falls off the roof, and he damaged and embarrassed somebody else. You're responsible for damages, but for humiliation, you need to have intent in order to do the damage. Tana Rabban and the rabbis thought, if a man embarrasses his friend when he's naked, he has to pay it. But you can't compare embarrassing somebody when they're naked to embarrassing somebody when they're clothed, because when they're clothed, he's going to feel more humiliation. If you embarrass him while he's bathing, He's responsible. But ain't no doma bisho beis merchatz v'aisha b'shuk. You can't compare embarrassing somebody when they're in the bathhouse to embarrassing somebody in the marketplace, where it's going to be a greater level of humiliation. Hamar bisho arom. If you embarrass him when he's naked, chayev. So the Gemara asks, arom barbosha. So can he really achieve humiliation while he's naked? Amar Papa, my arm. What does it mean, arom? To us, zika karchichnu lamane. That a wind came and brought his clothes and started to lift him up. Va'asahu v'dalinu tveu ba'ishay. And this man came and he lifted up his clothing even more. And as a result, he embarrassed him more than he was embarrassed from the wind. And so therefore he's responsible. So if you're in the bathhouse, can you really be humiliated? Amar Papa, Bisho Agavanar. Yeah, so the person was by the banks of the river. So basically, he lifted up his clothes a little bit to put his legs in the river, and his friend came and lifted them more. By Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo, Bisho Yashen Umeis. Let's say you have the following question. You embarrass somebody when he's sleeping, and afterwards he dies. What will be the law under these circumstances? So the Gemara says, "My kami bale." What's the exact question? I'm kami bale. Mishum kisufahu misle. Do we say, why do you have to pay humiliation because you've embarrassed him and now he's dead? So he never actually felt the embarrassment. Or maybe because you embarrassed him in public, and so therefore you denigrated him in public, and even though he didn't realize it, you have to pay it. Tashmara Meir Omer Cheresh v'Katan Yeshlan Boshes. A deaf, mute, and a minor have humiliation, but Shota ain't Boshes. But an insane does not have humiliation. If you want to say it's because you denigrated him, Hainu de Katani Katan. That's why it says the minor, because you did it to him. But if you say because you embarrassed him, Katan Barbosh, so is a Katan capable of humiliation? So if you say it's because you denigrated him, I feel Shotanami. Then even if you did to an insane person, you should be responsible for the damages. The Gemara says, Shota Elcha Boshes Kedu. He's already embarrassed. The insane person is already embarrassed. The Gemara says, Mikol Makom Nifsha Minei Mishum Zeluso. Why don't we learn from here? That's because of denigrating, and so therefore you're responsible because he doesn't feel humiliation. Dimishum kisufa, katan bar kisufa. Because if it's because of humiliation, does the katan really have humiliation? Mara says yes. That if you embarrass him, he's going to be embarrassed. He's at the age where if he's embarrassed, he will understand it. Papa says this is how we explain Rabbi Abba's question. Mishum kisufa didehu, and harmayasli, it's because of his embarrassment he's dead. Odoma mishum boshas hamishpacha, was the embarrassment of his family, and so they're still alive and they notice it. Tashma cheresh v'ketan yeshlo boshas, shotein lo boshas. Cheresh and katan, they have humiliation, but the insane does not. If you want to say it's because of the family's humiliation, that's why it says a minor. So if you say it's his own humiliation, does the minor really have humiliation? Elamai. So Gemara says Mishum Boshas Mei Mishpacha Filu Shotanami. So if it's because of the embarrassment of the family, even a fool, an insane person also undergoes that. Gemara says Shota Elocha Boshas Kedol Mizu. The insane person, they're already completely embarrassed. The family. Mikom Makom Nifsha Meinei Mishum Boshas Mishpacha. We should anyway learn from here that it's because of the embarrassment of the family. Dimishum kisufa, because if its own is embarrassment, katan bar kisufa, is the minor really capable of humiliation? Amar Papa indim akamale umechem. Now we're talking about a case that if other people embarrass him, he'll be embarrassed, and so that's the reason. Gemara says, "Vatanya Rabbi Omer cheresh yeshlo boshes shota ein lo boshes," and the Gemara says we'll prove this from a braysa. Rabbi taught a deaf person he never has humiliation. An insane person. A deaf person, he has humiliation. An insane person doesn't. A katan, a minor, pamim yeshlo, pamim. Sometimes he has, sometimes he doesn't. And how it be? Ha the mekalmalei call him. Ha the mekalmalei will call him. It depends whether or not he notices it when you embarrass him. So the Gemara says, "Hamavayish es hasuma." If you blind a blind person, you're going to be exempt. Masnis in the local Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda says, "Suma ein lo boshes." Rabbi Yehuda says a blind person has no humiliation. Kacha Rabbi Yehuda poter mechayve golos. And so too, if a blind person killed somebody accidentally, he would not go into exile, Mechayim Malkios, and he would not go get lashes, and he would not get death from the court. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says a blind person exempt? It says you should not have mercy upon the Edim Zomamin. Ma'asam Sumin. Well, just like their witness, the blind person is not responsible for what he plotted to do because they don't see. Afacha. So to respect to humiliation, Sumin well. And a blind person or not. And Mechai Golios, why is he not responsible to be sent into exile? The Tanya, below Raos, he did it without looking. Pratul Summa, that excludes a Sutta with a Summa which never can see. Diva Rabbi Huda. Omer Larabos, the Summa comes to include a blind man. My time is Rabbi Huda. So what's the reasoning for Rabbi Huda? It says in the Pasuk, comes to forest to collect wood. Afilusuma, you might think even a blind man, Kasrachmana Bahora Uslam excludes a blind person. Meir says Kasrachmana Bahora Uslam. Then the Torah says Kasrachmana Bulidas Lumiyute to exclude another category. And that's called a miut achar miut. That's like a double negative. Shei miut achar miut ela rabo. That comes to include Rabbi Huda, who beplidas, prat miskavin huda. So it comes to exclude someone who has intent. And also chayva misos bezdin, that they are not obligated for death from the court. How do we know that? Because Asya rotzech mechayev. We compare it to the exile, the accidental killer. Chayev malchus. How do we know that the blind person is not responsible for lashes? Because it says Rasha mechayev mitzvahs best, and it compares it to somebody who kills somebody who's liable for death by Russia. Tanya Yidach Rabbi Yehuda Amar Suma Elo Bonches. Rabbi Yehuda says the blind person has no humiliation. Rabbi Yehuda Pocher Mikol Dinam Shevet Torah. Rabbi Yehuda says the blind person is exempt from all the laws of the Torah. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? Because it says that the court should decide between somebody who strikes and between the blood avenger ala mishpatima ela. Kol sheyeshno b'maka b'go adam. Yeshno b'mishpatim kol she'eno b'mako go adam eno b'mishpatim. So if you're involved in the mitzvah of go adam, of a city of refuge, then you have all the laws. Otherwise, you don't. You don't have monetary laws. Rabbi Yehuda says that a summa, a blind person, is exempt from all the mitzvahs in the Torah. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. So these are the laws and the judgments. Whoever is not in the mishpatim, it's not in the laws. Says Rabbi Yosef, a very often quoted Gemara, Mireish at first, Amina Amanda Amar Rabbi Yehuda, whoever would say that the law is like Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Summa Pater Mina Mitzvos, that a blind person is exempt from mitzvos. Initially I would have made him a festive day because Rabbi Yosef was blind, and he said, I'm exempt. But my time I do because I'm not commanded. And kavina mitzvahs, and I do the mitzvahs. Hashid the shamas later Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Chanina gadol mitzvah osa yoser mish eno mitzvah osa. The other Rabbi Chanina said, great is the one who is commanded to do, greater than even the one who is not commanded. Ma'anda Amarli ena lachak Rabbi Yehuda. Whoever will tell me the law is not like Rabbi Yehuda, I would do avina yom rabbanan. I would do the festive day. My time because when I commanded to do it and I do it, I get even more reward. Okay, that's the beautiful daf from today. Bava Kamma Pei Vav.